Reimagining Success, episode 278. Would you like to be as successful in your relationships as you are in your career or business? Well, this episode is for you. It's an interview with Katarina Polonska, who is a high performance relationship coach. Of course, we dig into her impressive CV and the various career pivots that came along the way, some pretty big milestones, seen through the lens of things like COVID and the Ukraine war as well. And we then dug into this idea of succeeding in your relationships and not neglecting these other areas of your life that are just as important, if not more important, than your professional career. Hope you enjoy the episode. You're listening to the Reimagining Success podcast, where we help you design a business and a life that allows you freedom from the 9-to-5. I'm your host, Anna Lundberg, ex-corporate good girl, now a business mentor and coach, author, mum of 2, and I'm here to help you create more freedom, flexibility, and fulfillment. Now let's get started with redefining success outside of the 9-to-5. Okay, hello everybody and welcome to another interview. It's a little bit different today because we will be digging into a career pivot, but we'll also be looking at a concept and an idea that is quite dear to me for 2 reasons. One is, if you know me at all, if you have been listening for a while, one of my frameworks is the 5 L's framework, which is all around thinking about success holistically. So I talk about, yes, career is important, but we want to be thinking about our health and well-being, our relationships, growing as a person, learning, developing, and so on, making a difference in the world and having fun as well. And my guest today is very much in the relationships piece. And so we'll be digging into that in a moment, and I'll be very interested to do so. So without further ado, this is Katarina Polonska. Katarina, take it away. Could you tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. And thank you so much for having me. So I'm a high performance relationship coach. And what I mean by that is I work with predominantly executives or kind of VP level plus. So people who are seasoned professionals, have high powered careers, busy schedules. And they kind of have everything in their life pretty much figured out. So, they probably have a nice home. They probably have a nice friendship circle. Their career is going well. They might have good family relations. They've probably done a bit of therapy in the past to heal any family dynamics that might need healing. But it's their relationship, their kind of personal relationship that isn't quite what they want it to be. And I always say I help successful professionals become as accomplished in their relationships as they are in their careers. It's like the main kind of discrepancy that I've been seeing, and that I myself also had, and was really kind of confused about, like, where am I going wrong in this one area of my life? Everything else is working out. I couldn't quite figure it out.
Yeah, and let's dig into that. I think it's really interesting. The idea of being accomplished. When I talk about this, I find it is quite odd to talk about being accomplished in your relationships and be accomplished in your hobbies. I mean, yes, we tend to people, especially midlife crisis, we end up doing Ironman and ultra marathons and all these things. And we tend to bring the same energy to our personal goals as we do to our professional career goals, but it's not as talked about, certainly in the relationship place. To talk about being a high performance relationship coach, and you had to there explain what you meant by it, which I think is fantastic. It's quite a jarring way of looking at it, maybe, but I think it's a really important one. But you mentioned you were in that zone, I guess, in the past. So can you tell us, what was your career journey like initially?
Yeah. So I spent, like most kind of professional ambitious people, I spent the bulk of my 20s jumping from job to job, and I think I had like 3 different careers in my 20s alone. I went from being in the champagne and fine wine industry, which I loved, and it's actually what brought me out to Ibiza first time round. So I built a business out here when I was like 23, and then I realized I don't think I can be an entrepreneur in Ibiza for the rest of my life. I think I'm a bit too young for this. I need a bit more corporate experience. So I sold my house and went to Dubai. And I worked for a big corporation out there, the biggest alcohol supplier in the Middle East. So I lived out there for a couple of years. And then I went back to the UK. Dubai made me realize I don't want to do champagne anymore. I want to do something a bit more meaningful. So I went back to university and went to Oxford and did a women's studies degree, which is really looking at like masculinity, femininity, and what I looked at, like the limitations of the constructs and how limited it is when we try to adhere to these kind of very traditional stereotypes. And that's kind of important for the work that I do actually in the relationship space. But so I was looking at that. Then I went to work in philanthropy for a while, looking at like working with nonprofits, and moved out to Canada to build an impact investment vehicle helping Syrian refugees with a whole initiative around women and children. So I did that for a while. And then I burnt out because I realized that philanthropy is hard work. And I mean, we had a 10 million euro target as a team of 3 women in 1 year. And like we worked so hard to try and hit that target and just burnt out. All 3 of us burnt out. So that's really what made me go into kind of out of philanthropy and into behavioral science. Because I was thinking, what do I care about? And I realized, well, I care about change. I care about behavioral change. My dad is a coach. He was an executive coach for pretty much, I mean, he was like an executive consultant, but a managing consultant, but he became a coach probably about 10 years ago. So I did grow up with that in the background and all the self-help books. And so I knew a lot about positive psychology. And that's what made me go into behavioral science, where my kind of initial hypothesis was, if I can learn behavioral science, I can probably help people do more good, because I can help people kind of get rid of all of the stuff that's holding them back from actually connecting with who they are at their core. So I worked for a big behavioral science consultancy out of Vancouver. They were actually a New York company, and loved that. Like really loved that. And slowly over time, kind of got more and more exposed to coaching. So I was doing a lot of like group training and selling the kind of group training programs and building out strategies for companies like really big corporations, kind of Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, building out their human capital strategies. And in that, coaching was very much like part and parcel of how do you develop people. And so eventually, this is kind of where it gets to like personal life, but I ended up moving back to London for various personal reasons. Moved back to London, started working for the biggest coaching company in the world. And really that's what made me realize, okay, I don't want to be on the strategy side of things. I actually want to be the one doing the coaching. I knew I'd take a massive pay cut. I knew that it would be very jarring to go from like corporate, VP role and having all of that comfort to going into coaching, which is such a saturated industry. But it was very much kind of a personal choice fueled by all the different personal factors, which I can share about later. I didn't think it would actually work, though. I didn't think there'd be something that I'd do long term. Like truly, I thought it was like, I'll do this for a few months to treat it as a hobby, do my ICF, and and then find something else. And yeah, it's been like a year and a half, and I'm still here and looking to grow it this year. And I can't imagine anything else, really.
I think a lot of us come to coaching that way. I did it because I was curious. I have no idea how I found it. We've done a bit of coaching in corporates, and I did it for personal development. And then because I loved it so much, I think we do. And then we sort of become quite evangelistic about it and just add it into the business model. I guess before going further, obviously an incredibly impressive career journey and some really smart, intentional moves based on self-awareness and knowing that you want to make a bigger difference and so on. How did your perception of what success looked like change through those different phases of your career?
Oh, I love that question. Yeah. And it's something I was literally pondering about this morning and last night, actually. And I think when I was in Vancouver and I was working for that behavioral science consultancy, which I loved that job. Like I, hand on my heart, loved that job so much. And I was paid exceptionally well and it was so comfortable. And I love my colleagues and I love my work-life balance. And, I'd never worked evenings. I never worked weekends. It was just a really brilliant place to be. My life was so comfortable. And at the same time, I had this kind of constant nagging feeling in the back of my head, which I think I had throughout most of my 20s, which is, I know I have an entrepreneurial spirit. I know I want to create something. And I know I want it to be something that's going to be kind of in the field of like vulnerability, healing, love, heart, something around that, probably because it's such a big part of my life. And I just was too scared to go into it. And I remember in Vancouver being like, oh, I think I'm in a dangerous place here because I think I'm getting golden handcuffs. I think I'm getting into this place where I'm so comfortable here and I'm so chilled. I don't need to look at my career. I don't need to look at my success. I was previously engaged to my ex-fiance out there. And I had, we bought a lovely home in the mountains in Whistler, and the plan was to move out there. I was kind of like winding down my ambition a little bit. And I honestly felt like I was retiring a little bit, retiring while still working, but it just didn't feel stressful. And the two things that kind of shifted everything for me were, number one, I called off the engagement. So calling off that engagement, it kind of threw everything like into disarray for me, because my life kind of imploded when that happened. I never thought I would call off an engagement. I never thought I'd call off a big wedding. I never thought I'd be holding a wedding dress and I'd be like, what the heck do I do with this thing now? And the humiliation that came with that, because I was alone in Canada, it was COVID. I had very little, friends. I had no family around. I hadn't seen my family for like years at this point. And I lost my network, which was his network. In that space, the humbling of it all, kind of initially, like I went deep into my corporate career. Like I kind of was savoring the money that I was making and kind of healing by like just like spending and taking care of myself and making my apartment extra nice and kind of all the home comforts. But after a while, that question around career started to pop up in my head of like, well, like what now, right? Like there's nothing to really distract me. I don't really have any other plan. I'm not building a life with someone. I'm not going to have a baby anytime soon. Like what am I actually doing? And then as I was kind of ruminating over that stuff and still not really acting on it, Ukraine war started, and my dad lives in Ukraine. So when that kicked off, I'll never forget, it was like 2 weeks of just pure hell in my flat in Vancouver, like pacing the flat, like honestly thinking there's going to be a nuclear holocaust, because I just was expecting it to happen. And my dad phoning me and like crying down the phone, as a refugee with his family, because he's got a new family out there. And the fear that I felt was like some of the worst fear that I've ever felt. And I was still grieving the broken engagement. It had only been a few months prior. So I was a hot mess. I was really, really, really not well. And I felt some support at work, but I also felt like very isolated and very much like, well, I'm here in Vancouver. I'm on the West Coast. I'm very far from all of this stuff. And I remember I went down to LA for a business trip, and I was meeting with a mental health wellbeing company. And I remember thinking like, this is great. I'm with a mental health company. They'll get it. And even then people were a bit like, what's the stress? I don't get it. It's all so far away from here. And I was living with this real sense. I was like, I don't know if my dad's going to die. I don't know if, and my rest of my family are in Slovakia on the border of Ukraine. So it was this kind of big dichotomy of like a threat of death and like just overwhelming fear and horror, with everything's really normal here on the West Coast and we're all living really comfortable lives and everyone's earning 6-figure plus and having a great time. And I just felt like, I know it's funny because I had a friend in the UK who felt the same thing, and we're actually both like half Russian, right? So it's also double messed up because I can never go back to the homeland. But we both had this feeling of, I can't deal with this comfort right now. I actually want to go onto the front lines. I actually want to go into Ukraine. I actually want to help. I want to be there. I want to like support. And something clicked in my head there, where I knew I had to come back to Europe. And so I did move back and I joined that big coaching company, which again, I thought, perfect. I'm going to be in this kind of coaching environment in a safe space, and I can kind of like help other people and channel my own grief and channel my own hurt and pain around what's going on in the world into serving others. But I didn't really feel that. And I also there felt I'm not really safe to show up with what I'm really experiencing here. And this is kind of very clear divide of like work cat, which has to like shut everything down and just show up and perform. And then what's really going on, which I can understand, but it just didn't really mean anything to me anymore. Like the money didn't really mean anything to me anymore. I was living in London. I had this beautiful like Kensington apartment. And again, I was thinking like, I finally made it. Last time I lived in London, I was like living with 4 other people and a rat. There was literally a rat in my living room. Like it was horrible. And when I left to Vancouver, everything kind of took off for me. So being back in London with, everything I'd ever dreamed of, the lovely apartment, the salary, the great job, but then being like, well, I just called off this engagement and I'm in my early 30s. So what the hell am I going to do now? And there's a freaking war going on down the road. It shifted everything. It really did. At that point, I just kind of got this mindset of like, okay, well, enough crying, enough grief. If I'm going to assume that I'm probably going to die alone and potentially quite soon if this nuclear malarkey takes off, what do I want my life to look like? Like, what do I actually want my life to look like? And I remember I came out here to Ibiza on the day that I was meant to be getting married to my ex-fiance. And I came out on my own and I just kind of I actually just went out on my own and just, I was drinking wine and in like the plazas and just trying to have a nice time. And that's when the epiphany started to come to me of, I need to quit my corporate life. I need to train to be a coach because I really do believe in this work and I really enjoy helping others and serving others. My original hypothesis was I actually wanted to do relationship coaching and help people kind of connect to themselves, relationship to self, because that's where a lot of my own healing had come. And like, screw the money, screw whatever. I'm just going to be a nomad. And I had this vision of myself kind of living in this cold, damp Spanish apartment, just like writing and coaching. And I was like, it's fine. It's better. It's better than, grinding away 12-hour days in my London apartment, being screamed at by someone. So that's really when I decided to make that move and redefine what success looked like. And a week later, I met my now husband at a music festival when I was actually, again, like redefining my own success and just having fun on my own. Went to a festival on my own and met him. And he'd also gone through a very similar journey, like a very, very similar journey. He was from Canada. He was there on holiday in London, had also burnt out at work, had also experienced a lot of kind of stress and like grief in the workspace, and had also decided to quit his normal job. His plan was to move to Colombia and buy a finca and like start doing retreats and kind of get some land. But we ended up here in Spain together, and we both kind of took this journey and built something very different for ourselves than I would ever imagine that we've got. That was a really long answer, sorry.
No, but it's so fascinating. And of course, so many threads, and then the geopolitical context laid over it. And I hope your dad and his family are okay now. So, I mean, a couple of interesting things. There's so many aspects of it. The comfort that you talked about is interesting, isn't it? Because, and then contrasted with the sort of life or death drama, which is very real. I think we don't realize how comfortable we are, and comfort can be very close to complacency. And I always think, we're worrying about these things that aren't really a big deal if you zoom out, but of course they're the things that you're concerned about, so they are important to you. But that contrast, and it's much harder to give up that comfort and to go off the path of the corporate career. You're very successful, you've got the money, you've got the fiance, it's all going swimmingly, so why on earth would you sort of pull the rug from under yourself? COVID and on top of that as well. And then really interesting to hear that then when you sort of go out and redefine these things, you then realign with another partner as well. I guess coming to the relationship piece, I'm curious because I know that the little I know about the Russian culture, it's quite important that you get married young. Was that a feature at all? Is that sort of a cultural expectation that you carried with you?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually one of the things that fueled my studies of like gender, right, of masculinity, femininity, because I grew up in a very kind of gendered household. Though interestingly enough, my mom's always been kind of hardworking, like out there, very successful professional. And so was my dad. And ultimately, I think that's what really led to their breakup, that they were both very ambitious people who kind of just grew apart. But yeah, I went to a girls' school. I've always kind of had instilled into me that I have to be ultra like feminine and blah, blah, blah. And Slovakia is the same, right? It's kind of very traditional stereotype of what it is to be a woman. And I think I always kind of knew that I'd probably get married later in life. And I got engaged when I was like 31 first time around, or 30 years old first time around, which already felt a bit late, but I was like, yeah, at least I'm kind of on the timeline. And yeah, like I said, I spent a lot of time at Oxford, like dismantling toxic femininity, because that's really what it is. It's toxic femininity, dismantling all, but it's still ingrained, right? It's still very much a childhood core wound. And yeah, like it's just something, when the whole engagement ended, it was so terrifying to be exposed out there of God, holy cow, I really messed this up. Like I'm not fitting into any stereotype at all anymore. Like I'm just kind of out on my own into the wilderness again. I didn't want to be out in the wilderness. Very, very heavily cultured in that space, hugely. And I think a lot of women have like rebelled against those narratives for sure, especially the ones that have left.
Yeah, and I guess that's one narrative. And then the other narrative, which I think I grew up more with, is you're an independent woman, you don't need a man. And that's sort of the other extreme in a way, that you sort of don't, because you're earning your money and you're living your best life. And why on earth would you? My story was always, well, why would I want a man around the house who just leaves his smelly socks and the seat up? Like I'm so happy. And, and that's a narrative that perhaps is equally damaging depending on what you want. So I think it's an interesting, there's lots of different stories that can be playing in your head, and I certainly had to unravel a lot of that myself as well.
For sure.
So this kind of area that you help, so you said high performing women, that's high achieving, what is the challenge in that? Why are we focusing so much on our careers, I guess, to the detriment of other areas, in particular relationships?
And that, again, really, really good question. And I think it's not to say that I wouldn't be out there helping someone who isn't, some kind of high power professional. It's really just because like it's a world that I understand. I understand how when we are successful in our careers, we are often quite rational, logical people because the world of professionalism, especially corporate, is pretty rational and logical, right? And so when we're really up there thinking from the kind of the neck up and we're up in our heads the whole time, we tend to miss and neglect the more soft, hate that term, but like the soft skills and the emotional aspects of ourselves. And there really isn't any room for it in the professional world. And so that's something that, again, I can really relate to because so much of my corporate life was spent like performing, achieving, hitting my KPIs, hitting my goals, like strategy, like all of this stuff. And then when it came to my relationships, I was like, I actually don't know what the heck I'm doing here. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to assume that because everything else in my life is generally working out, that this part of my life will generally work out and it'll be fine. Like I think most people think. And then when it got to the point where I thought, well, it's time to find a partner, I went ahead and I found a partner and ticked all my boxes and, got that checklist and everything was fine. And he was also professional and together, it was like lovely professional life together. But what I realized very, very kind of, I wouldn't even say quickly, but like after about a year or so, was I realized I'm actually not feeling that fulfilled here. I don't think he's feeling that fulfilled. Something seems to be missing. And that's when I started to realize there's something deeper going on inside that I need to connect to actually have a fulfilling relationship. And I didn't really know what it was. I was very disconnected from what it was. I couldn't fathom what was possibly wrong because on the surface, everything looked perfect, like Instagram perfect. And so that's what I see a lot of in these kind of successful lives is that things might look great on the surface. I work with a lot of founders, your startup might have exited, you might be doing really well, you might be scaling, you might be growing. Beneath the surface, there's a lot of loneliness, a lot of self-disconnect. And then from that, a lot of stress, anxiety, and burnout, that kind of the symptoms. And I noticed that within myself. And it was only when I began to solve for the relationship part of my life that everything else began to get solved. And so it's just this kind of like neglected space that very successful professionals find that they often have and often don't even know they actually have it. Right? The kind of like the assumption is like it's like no one's really that happy or it's fine, it's good enough.
And they're so interconnected, aren't they? As you said, it's quite neglected because we look at things in isolation. And I've had people come to me in the past, they want to change their career and their business needs to grow and all these things. Sometimes they've ended up not prioritizing that and actually prioritizing, I'm in my 30s, I'd like to meet someone, I'd like to perhaps have a baby. And that's just completely changed how they look at things. And they still come back to wanting to build a fulfilling business, but it's on different terms to some extent. So it's just the interconnectedness, like we talked about the health as well. If you're burning out, if you're stressed, you're not going to be able to build a successful business or career. Likewise, if you're feeling really lonely and anxious or longing to have a different relationship status, whatever it is, that will have an impact too. And you mentioned before the masculine feminine piece. I find that really interesting because I've read a little bit about it, and I do think there's some truth in it, and the idea that we can be very sort of masculine energy focused on goals and driving forwards and so on, and then it's hard to settle into that, as you said, softer, more feminine energy and so on. But you also said you were kind of debunking that, so I'm curious, can you tell me more about that distinction and whether it's helpful or not?
No, well, I think the way you phrased it is helpful, right? And just kind of to go back to your earlier point, like in the world of corporate, I keep calling it corporate, but again, it could be startup life, whatever it is a very masculine space because it's a capitalist space. It's all about producing and doing, and it's very masculine energy. And if we talk about energies here, and with that often comes this idea that I actually don't need anyone. I'm fine. I fell into that trap too, but I actually don't need anyone. I'll be fine. Like, I have a couple of friends and my family at a distance, and that's enough. I don't need anyone. I'm fine with my work. I'm fine with my fulfillment. I'm fine with my hobbies, with my whatever it might be. And then a whole separate trajectory, but we can get onto that dopamine addiction, right? Where we make money, we spend money on things that make us feel good immediately. And then we spend more money and we kind of keep chasing these little quick dopamine hits, as opposed to going to the deeper, longer term dopamine hit, which is finding love and finding a healthy relationship. It's slower, but it's much more sustainable. And so with that kind of masculine, feminine stuff, I think what I was debunking, what I do debunk is this idea that women are inherently have to be feminine and men inherently have to be masculine, right? Like that's just very archaic thinking. When we talk about masculine, feminine energies, which even my own husband, he hates those terms. He's like, oh, makes him feel ick. It's not about like the gendered lens. It's just about the different qualities that are associated with the different energies. And they've just got labeled that way, right? You can call it yin and yang, whatever you want to call it. But the idea is everyone's a blend of both. We're all a blend of both. You might have a core essence, which you have a leaning towards one or the other. And typically that will be connected to your gender identity and how you show up in the world. But generally speaking, we're all a blend of both. And a healthy individual will have a blend of both. They'll be able to express both. So someone who might be a man who's more masculine identified still needs to have a really healthy feminine side to him. He has to be able to express emotion and to feel love and to soften and to lean in and connect with his needs. He has to. Otherwise, he's going to burn out. He's going to be running on empty. He's going to be running as like an empty shell, which I see a lot of, again, especially in that kind of more corporate world. And the same way with women who identify as more feminine and kind of more feminine beings, they still have to have a healthy masculine. Like an unhealthy feminine being is going to be like, if we think about masculine qualities as being kind of more structured, more productive, like more doing all of this stuff, an unhealthy feminine without any integrated masculine is going to be a little bit all over the place, right? She's not going to have any control over her finances. She might be a little bit needy and expect someone to kind of be the breadwinner and provide for her, unable to provide for herself. She might not know about like saving money and actually showing up at her work and being a bit disciplined with times and all of these things. Again, it's not about the gender, it's just about the different energies. And we're always a blend of the two. I still haven't figured out what's a more productive way of talking about this, like using the more mainstream language. But the main thing I was debunking is that, you know, we're kind of one or the other, and you're born with a sex, and then that sex dictates your gender, and then that gender is like you're these things now, which is not. That's where toxic masculine and toxic feminine come from, because it's so kind of polarized. And you're so extreme with either that you're not really a fully fledged human.
And as with everything, I guess these concepts are useful until they're not. So as long as you have the caveats and understand they're not going to define you and put you in a box, but it can give you a slightly different perspective maybe, and think of things that you're neglecting. And when I talk about going back to sort of my 5L model, these 5 areas, I'm always careful to say, look, you're not aiming for 10 out of 10 on each area all the time. There will be a natural ebb and flow. Putting you on the spot, is it possible to have an uber successful, fulfilling career and the super successful, fulfilling, wonderful, accomplished relationship, as you put it, and the well-being and the fun, all these things? Is that possible over the long term? Will there be ups and, I mean, I'm always answering a question myself, so I'll stop there. But is it possible to have it all, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is. I think you have to be really clear on defining what is having it all to you, right? Like if having it all is, I want to be working 90-hour weeks and generating billions. Again, I'm just making this up. And I also want to never, ever fight with my partner and have, you know, the most radiant holiday style romance every single day. That might be a little bit unrealistic. But if it's, I want a successful career where I feel personally quite fulfilled and I have enough money to have, you know, kind of some disposable income, and we have savings and we have a future planned. And then I have quality time with my partner and we connect on a daily basis and her needs are met and my needs are met. Absolutely. It's all about being more intentional. That's kind of what I always try to get across, and probably why I feel more comfortable working with the more kind of corporate professionals rather than someone who maybe they're a bit artsy and maybe, you know, they have an abundance of cash and they don't need to work. Because I can't really relate to that. I don't know what you do if you've got 20 hours of free time in the day. Like I genuinely don't. I know what to do if I'm busy, you know, 8 to 10 hours of the day at my desk, or maybe a little bit less. And then I have to find ways to connect with my partner and maintain the relationship, which I think is kind of the mainstream challenge that at least folks on LinkedIn have. And so that's what I know how to solve for, which is really about intentionality and getting really, really granular about like, what are we solving for with every moment that we have together? And it might seem a little bit kind of overthinking it, but it's like with anything. If you can overthink things in the beginning and set the foundations up well, then absolutely you can have it all. And that doesn't mean that there's not going to be bumps along the road, as you said.
No, you're talking about language. Intentionality is so important. I think knowing what you want is really the start of anything, whatever the area of your life, including, you know, I want to lose weight and get fit. Okay, but what does that actually mean? And really getting granular on that. A couple of questions to finish up, I guess. If somebody is resonating with this and feeling, oh, I really have been like hustling away. Yes, I'm successful. It all looks great on the outside, but either they're single and they haven't been prioritizing trying to meet someone, or perhaps they're in a relationship, could be the wrong relationship, or at least they're not dedicating enough time and energy to the relationship. What can you tell them as a one step, I guess, they can take, or how they can think about it to start making a change?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest first step is to get really, really honest with yourself, which is actually a really hard step. I think most of us are lying to ourselves on a daily basis. Again, I think it's part of being in a corporate capitalist world. I think we have to lie to ourselves, otherwise we'd all lose our minds a little bit if we realized that all the golden handcuffs that we're in. But get really honest with yourself about what isn't working for you. And then the things that aren't working for you, again, get really, really honest on those. Don't try to sugarcoat it. Don't try to hide from yourself, but really, really be honest and clear. And then what are you going to do about it? Because when we can be honest with ourselves, it's already a big part of self-awareness. But when we are honest with ourselves and we don't actually do anything about it, we're actually potentially hurting ourselves, because we're creating a kind of cognitive dissonance, a discrepancy between I know something and I refuse to act on it, right? Like that erodes self-trust. Self-trust is all based, I know something and I'm going to change it because I respect and validate what I know, and I'm giving myself that acknowledgement. That's something I've really struggled with most of my life, which is knowing something intuitively or being aware of something and then not doing anything about it. And that can chip away at you over time.
That is huge. The disconnect between sort of knowing where you want to be and not doing anything about it, that can be soul destroying. So that's huge.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Coming back full circle then, what does success look like for you today?
Yeah, great question. Success, it all comes down to freedom for me. And freedom comes down to love as well, right? So when I know that I call it like successfully in love, like when I'm happily in love with my life, with my partner, with my work, then I'm free, because I'm actually, my mind is at peace and I'm not kind of chasing anything. And that looks like having freedom of mobility. So right now I'm living in Ibiza. I don't know where I'm going to live in the next few years. Like we don't know where we're going to end up being. Having kind of freedom of mind and not being stressed too much by where's my next paycheck coming from, or like, am I going to get screamed at by my boss? Am I going to hit my targets? All the kind of classical worries there. And yeah, just having freedom, like freedom to choose my own destiny, freedom to choose my own life path, freedom to choose where I am, and just freedom all around.
That's huge. And you've been tapped in so many different ways. So beautiful.
Yeah.
Where can we find out more about you? What's the best place for people to go if they want to learn more about what you do and how you can help?
Yeah, it'll be my website. Tons and tons of stuff on there. The blog is also quite rich with some kind of tutorials and things to do. And there's a diagnostic as well. So if anyone wants to see what might be blocking them, I built it out with a psychologist. I'm pretty proud of it. But it's katarinapolonska.com.
Perfect. We'll put that in the show notes as well. Yeah. Katarina, thank you so much. It was lovely to hear, and thank you for your generosity and transparency and sharing your personal and professional journey, as well as giving your advice. So thank you for your time, and here's to your success this year and beyond.
Oh, thank you. You too.
Explore a broader definition of success with my free assessment to consider what success really means to you across different areas of your life. Evaluate where you are today and prioritize the right goals to get you to where you want to be. Get your copy at onestepoutside.com/success. That's onestepoutside.com/success.